Snowage, Vermont, lay hushed beneath a blanket of white on Christmas Eve, the kind of night that seemed painted by memory rather than time. Lights shimmered from every porch, smoke curled gently from chimneys, and the faint laughter of neighbors drifted through the crisp air. Yet in the tallest house at the end of Pine Hollow Road, the world stood still. Inside that modern mansion of glass and shadow, Nathaniel Crestwell, founder and CEO of one of the East Coast's largest health technology companies, stood before a towering window, a glass of scotch forgotten in his hand. To the outside world, he was success personified: sharp suits, clean lines, headlines, and stock numbers. But inside those walls, perfection was emptiness wearing polish. Every year, Nathaniel spent Christmas Eve exactly this way, standing alone, waiting for something he couldn't name. His house gleamed like a showroom. No clutter, no laughter, no scent of food. Even the Christmas tree, adorned in sterile silver and white, stood like a monument to loneliness. The only sounds were the faint tick of a clock and the whisper of snow brushing the glass. He stared out, lost in thought, wondering why he kept returning to this ritual year after year. Maybe he was waiting for a sound to break the silence, or perhaps for a miracle he no longer believed in. His reflection flickered faintly in the window, ghostly against the glow of falling snow. Then came the sound. 3 soft knocks, delicate but unmistakable, echoed from the front door. Nathaniel froze.
No one ever came here.
Not on Christmas Eve, not ever. When the knock came again, firmer this time, he set down the glass and crossed the floor, each step heavy against the polished wood. He opened the door, and a rush of cold air swept inside. On the porch stood a young woman bundled in a wool coat and a worn knitted scarf, snow-dusting her hair. Beside her, a little girl with a bright pink dress and white mittens clutched a small, red-wrapped box. The woman smiled apologetically. "I hope we're not interrupting anything," she said. Nathaniel blinked, caught off guard. The girl stepped forward, holding up the box. "We brought cookies for our new neighbors." Her voice was soft and sure, the sound of innocence cutting through the winter air. The woman chuckled lightly. She insisted we deliver them tonight. "Says Christmas cookies taste better when they're shared." Nathaniel found his voice.
You just moved in?
The woman nodded. "Yes, down the street, the blue house with the red door." She extended a gloved hand. "I'm Ilara Whitcomb, and this is my daughter, Mira." The girl waved, cheeks pink from the cold. "Hi," it took Nathaniel a moment to react. Then, with a hesitant nod, he stepped aside. "Would you like to come in? It's freezing out there." Ilara's brows lifted slightly, as if surprised by his offer. "Are you sure?" He nodded again. "Yes, please." Once they stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. The silence that had suffocated the house seemed to ease, like air returning to lungs. Mira's eyes widened as she took in the grand space, the high ceilings, the bare tree, the neatness that bordered on emptiness. "Wow," she whispered. "It looks like a castle." "It's just a house," Nathaniel replied softly. "But it's really quiet," she said, tilting her head. Ilara smiled faintly, but her gaze lingered on the sterile perfection around her. "No music, no scent of dinner. You must keep things very orderly." He gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "I suppose so." They followed him into the kitchen, where Ilara placed the cookie box on the counter.
I hope you like chocolate chip, she said.
"We tried gingerbread, but someone got creative with the spices," Mira giggled.
I added cinnamon and ketchup. For the first time in years, Nathaniel laughed, a quiet, genuine sound that startled even him.
"Chocolate chip sounds perfect." Moments later, Mira sniffed the air.
Is that hot chocolate?
Nathaniel turned sharply. He had forgotten the pot simmering on the stove.
Yes, it is, he said, quickly moving to pour it.
"Would you like some?"
Yes, please.
Mira's excitement filled the room like sunlight through frost. He reached for his usual mugs, then hesitated, and instead pulled 2 old ceramic cups from the back of a cabinet.
Ivory with blue trim, ones he hadn't touched in years.
He dusted them gently before filling them with cocoa and handing them over. Mira sipped hers with delight. "This is the best ever." Elara smiled softly. "We've been giving cookies to all our neighbors. It's our little tradition." Nathaniel watched her daughter swing her legs under the chair, her joy infectious. "That's a lovely tradition," he said. For the first time in as long as he could remember, the house felt warm, not because of the heat, but because of their presence. Mira's gaze drifted to the tree in the corner. "Why is your tree sad, Mr. Nathaniel?" He blinked. "Sad?" She nodded seriously. "It looks lonely," Elara chuckled. Nathaniel's lips curved into a faint smile. "Well, it's been living alone for a while. It got used to it. That seemed to satisfy her, or so he thought." While the adults talked, Mira slipped away quietly. She approached the tree, untied the pink bow from her hair, and fastened it to one of the top branches. Then she pulled a few wrapped candies from her coat pocket and hung them carefully on the lower limbs. Finally, she unthreaded a piece of lace from her dress hem and draped it like a garland. "There!" she announced proudly. "Now it has friends." Nathaniel turned, startled. The bare, sterile tree now glowed softly under the lights, adorned with a child's imagination. Elara covered her mouth, eyes bright with emotion. He knelt beside Mira. "I think," he said quietly, "this might be the happiest that tree has ever been." Mira beamed. Elara looked at him not as a stranger anymore, but as someone who had just let a little light into his world. Later, when Elara bundled Mira into her coat, she thanked him softly. "For the cocoa, for letting us in." "Thank you for coming," he said. Before leaving, Mira darted back and hugged him tightly.
"I left my bow on the tree," she whispered.
"So it won't be lonely tomorrow." Nathaniel stood frozen as they disappeared into the snow. The warmth they left behind lingered like the scent of cocoa and the echo of laughter. That night, for the first time in years, the silence in his house did not feel empty. The snow in Snowage lingered for weeks, frosting every branch, every lamppost, and every window pane in quiet reverence. For Nathaniel Crestwell, something inside had shifted since that Christmas Eve. His home, once a monument to solitude, now felt less like an echo and more like a pause, waiting, somehow to be filled. It began with small changes. A morning walk down Main Street, a polite nod to neighbors he'd never bothered to meet. Then, one cold January morning, he stopped by the bakery, where Elara Whitcomb worked part-time. The little shop smelled of butter and cinnamon, alive with chatter and warmth. When she looked up from behind the counter and saw him, her surprise softened into a smile. "Nathaniel," she said, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I wasn't sure what to expect either," he admitted, clearing his throat. "But I heard your cookies are famous," she laughed lightly. "Famous might be pushing it. Would you like to try one anyway?" He nodded. That day, he bought a croissant, thanked her, and left. The next day, he returned, and the next. By the end of the week, the routine had quietly taken root. Sometimes he stayed for 5 minutes, sometimes 20. Mira often sat behind the counter with a coloring book, humming to herself or sipping apple juice. Every time he entered, her face lit up. "Mr. N," she'd call, waving with flour-dusted hands. The nickname stuck, and Nathaniel didn't mind. In fact, he found himself waiting for it each day. Their lives began weaving together in small, unspoken ways. Nathaniel helped Elara fix the flickering light above the bakery door. He showed Mira how to fold paper cranes from napkins. When Elara mentioned her dream of opening her own cookie stall at the winter market, but laughed it off as impossible, no money, no time, no permits, he simply nodded and said nothing. 3 days later, an email appeared in her inbox, a local grant application from a startup initiative sponsored by Crestwell Innovations. There was no note, no signature, but she knew. She never mentioned it, and neither did he. The connection between them deepened quietly, like the roots of a tree under snow. Nathaniel and Mira grew close in that effortless way children inspire through presence rather than effort. She invited him to the Winter Craft Fair, and though he arrived overdressed in a wool coat and scarf that screamed outsider, he stayed the whole evening. She talked him into helping her build a snowman in the town square, his leather gloves clumsy but determined. When the library held its holiday story hour, Mira tugged him into a circle of children and handed him a book. "Read, please," she said. He did, using silly voices that made her giggle so hard she nearly toppled off her chair. "Later," she whispered to Ilara. "Mr. N reads funny."
I like it. Still,
Something tender but cautious lingered between Nathaniel and Ilara. They spoke easily, laughed often, but moved carefully, as if afraid the fragile peace might shatter if either reached too far. He never asked for more. She never presumed it. Then, one late afternoon, as the bakery emptied of customers and the last of the daylight slipped through frosted windows, Nathaniel cleared his throat. "If you're free, maybe you and Mira would like to come over for dinner." Ilara blinked, surprised. "You're cooking?"
attempting to, he said sheepishly. She glanced toward Mira, who squealed, "Yes! Please!" That Friday night, the air outside carried the scent of pine and chimney smoke.
Inside Nathaniel's home, the transformation was subtle but real. The once empty rooms now bore traces of life. Paper snowflakes taped to the windows, a scattering of children's books on the coffee table, and the little tree in the corner still wearing Mira's candies and pink bow. When Ilara and Mira arrived, they were met with the warmth of cinnamon and baked apples. Ilara paused at the door, her nose catching the familiar scent.
"Is that cinnamon?"
she asked. Nathaniel emerged from the kitchen, apron over his sweater. "And nutmeg," he said with a grin. "I hope I didn't ruin it." He led them to the dining table where 3 mismatched plates waited. In the center, a tray of small apple tartlets gleamed under the light. Ilara's eyes widened. "Galette de pomme?" she murmured. "My mother used to make these when I was a kid."
"I haven't had them in years." "You mentioned them once," Nathaniel said. "I thought I'd give it a try." For a moment she said nothing. Then, setting down the wine she'd brought, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. The hug was brief, but full of quiet gratitude. "You don't have to say anything," he whispered. From the kitchen table came Mira's off-key humming. She had already taken a tartlet and was licking cinnamon from her fingers, perfectly content. Ilara blinked back tears and laughed softly. Nathaniel turned away, pretending to busy himself with the plates, though the smile tugging at his mouth betrayed him. Later that night, after Mira had fallen asleep on the rug, Ilara tucked a blanket over her and glanced toward Nathaniel. He sat in the armchair, his hands folded around a half-empty mug of cocoa. "She adores you," Ilara said quietly. "I adore her too," he replied. They sat in the hush of the moment, the fireplace flickering low. Truths waited in the silence between them, truths shaped by pain, patience, and something unspoken that was beginning to grow roots. Ilara studied him for a moment. "You're good with her," she said softly. "Most men wouldn't know how to be, but you listen." Nathaniel's gaze drifted toward the embers. "I think it's because I always thought I'd be a father." The words seemed to weigh in the air. Ilara turned toward him, her voice gentler now. "What happened?" He hesitated, then set the mug down. "My wife was 6 months pregnant when she died," he said simply. "Car accident."
It was snowing that night. The room fell silent again. No ornamented phrases, no attempt to fill the quiet.
"Only truth." Ilara's eyes filled, but she didn't speak.
She didn't have to. The wind outside rose and settled again, brushing the window panes like a sigh. Inside, Two people who had long ago forgotten what it meant to be understood simply sat together, breathing the same still air. Stripped bare, Nathaniel let the words spill like thawing ice. "I was supposed to meet her for dinner," he said. "She was late. I was annoyed, then worried. Then came the call." Ilara said nothing. She only listened. "They didn't save the baby," he continued after a moment. "A boy, we just picked his name." He swallowed hard, his voice thinning.
"After that I worked. That's all I did. I even tried to adopt later, but they said I wasn't suitable." A bitter laugh broke through his composure. "Too isolated, too unstable."
They weren't wrong. Ilara crossed the room, sat across from him, elbows resting on her knees.
"That's not who you are now," she said quietly. He looked at her, eyes shadowed but soft.
"Maybe not anymore?" She hesitated, then spoke almost to the floor. "Mira's dad left when I told him I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready."
"I haven't seen him since?" Nathaniel's expression softened. "It was hard," she went on, her voice trembling. "Not just raising her, but the judgment. Everyone thinking I'd ruined my life." "You didn't," Nathaniel said simply. "Not even close." Their eyes met and held.
There was no pity, only recognition. Two people who had lost differently but deeply. For a long while they sat in silence. The air between them felt fragile yet calm. Two quiet hearts learning to breathe again. Eventually, Ilara rose, gathered her sleeping daughter into her arms, and thanked him for the evening. When the door closed behind them, Nathaniel remained in the dim glow of the lamp. The clock ticked softly, marking each second of stillness. Then his gaze fell on something on the table, the small red cookie box. It still sat where Mira had left it that first night, a crumpled corner and a faded green ribbon. He hadn't moved it. Neither had they. He reached for it slowly, fingers brushing the edge. For a moment he simply held it, feeling its weight, not sugar or flour or ribbon, but something far rarer, connection. For years he had kept every surface spotless, every schedule rigid, every emotion sealed away. But now, looking at that simple little box, he felt the walls he'd built begin to bend. The tears came softly at first, like snow melting from a roof. Then faster, until he could no longer hold them back. He bowed his head, shoulders shaking in the silence, the box cradled in his hands. He cried for the boy who never came into the world, for the woman he lost, for the years he'd hidden behind success and solitude, and for the small, miraculous chance that maybe, somehow, life was offering him one more try, not the same dream,
Not the same family.
but a second chance to love, to give, to open the door again, not just for others, but finally, mercifully, for himself. It began with a knock, but this time it was not Nathaniel's. Ilara opened the door to find a man standing on her porch, wrapped in a new coat, a duffel bag at his feet, and a look on his face that made her stomach twist. "Ilara," he said, as if the name still belonged to him. "We need to talk." The man was Daniel Reeves, Mira's biological father, the one who had walked out the moment Ilara told him she was pregnant 5.5 years ago. Now, without warning, he was here in Snowedge, claiming he wanted to be part of his daughter's life. But he was not here to ask. By the end of the week, Ilara received an official letter from a local attorney. Daniel had filed for partial custody. He had moved to Vermont, found temporary work, and claimed he was ready to step up. Ilara sat on the floor of her living room, the letter trembling in her hands. Mira was at school, Nathaniel was at work, and she had never felt more alone. She couldn't afford a lawyer. Worse, part of her still carried that old shame, that echo of people whispering she was irresponsible, unstable, too young, too alone. Daniel had money now, charm, a polished story. In court, he could make anything sound true. When she told Nathaniel that night, her voice barely rose above a whisper. He listened without interrupting, then gently set his mug down. "Do you want me to help?" he asked. Ilara hesitated.
"I don't want to take advantage of you," she said.
"This isn't your responsibility."
"I'm embarrassed even saying it." Nathaniel stepped closer.
"Ilara," he said softly,
"You never ask me for anything."
"I'm not doing this because you begged me or because I feel obligated." He waited until she looked up. "I'm doing this because you and Mira deserve someone to stand beside you. That's all."
"You don't have to carry this alone." Her throat tightened.
Tears burned, but she blinked them back. Within 2 days, Nathaniel had quietly hired one of the most respected family law attorneys in the state. Ilara protested, but he only said, "Let me do what I can, please." He also agreed to serve as a character witness. The courtroom was small and wood-panelled, tucked away in the next town over. Ilara sat stiffly beside her attorney, while Daniel leaned confidently across the aisle. Nathaniel sat in the second row, his suit immaculate, his face unreadable. Then the judge called him forward. He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked to the witness stand. "I've known Ilara Whitcomb and her daughter for several months," he began. "In that time, I've watched this woman raise a child with more love, grace, and strength than many two-parent households I've seen." He paused, locking eyes with the judge. "Mira is happy, well cared for, deeply loved. She's thriving because of her mother." Daniel's lawyer tried to rattle him with questions about his connection, his intentions, but Nathaniel held firm. "I'm not family," he said, "but I care deeply about them. And if this court is worried about whether Mira will have a stable, safe life, I'd offer anything I have to ensure it." Then his voice softened, the whole room leaning in. "If what she needs is a father figure, someone who will be there, day after day, in every quiet moment that matters, then I'm ready." He turned, slightly, meeting Daniel's gaze. "Not because I want to replace anyone," he said, "but because I will never walk away." Silence filled the courtroom. Even the clerk paused mid-typing. Ilara sat frozen, tears streaking down her cheeks, her hand clutched over her heart. In that moment, the man who once locked the world out had just opened it wide, and everyone in that room felt it. 1 year later, Snowidge looked exactly as it always did in December. Quiet streets dressed in garlands, wreaths hanging on weathered doors, and strings of white lights twinkling beneath a lace of frost. Pine trees lined the sidewalks, wrapped in red ribbons that fluttered gently when the wind passed. But the house at the end of Pine Hollow Road was no longer the same. Inside, warmth had taken root. Laughter echoed through rooms that had once known only the soft hum of solitude. The living room floor was buried under ribbons and wrapping paper, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and butter. "Careful with the frosting, Mira," Ilara called from the kitchen sink.
Laughing as she rinsed a tray. "I am being careful."
Mira shouted back from the table, her cheeks dusted with flour, a pink apron tied loosely over her dress.
"This one's for Mr. N. I want it to look like a Christmas tree, not a blob." Nathaniel entered just in time to hear that.
He stood in the doorway, brushing snow from his shoulders, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Hey," he said, hanging up his coat. "What are we turning into a blob this time?" Mira grinned and held up her creation, an uneven green-smeared cookie that vaguely resembled a tree. "It's perfect," Nathaniel said, crouching beside her chair. Mira beamed. "I made it with extra icing because you always say you don't want any, but then you eat mine anyway." He gasped in mock offense.
"You've uncovered my secret."
Ilara turned, wiping her hands on a towel. She handed Nathaniel a warm mug of cider, brushing a stray streak of flour from his shoulder. "Welcome home," she said softly. He looked at her, really looked. Her golden hair was tied in a loose bun, a few strands falling around her face. Her sleeves were rolled, her cheeks flushed from the oven's heat. This, he thought, was the version of her he loved most. Not that he had ever said it aloud. Neither of them had. They didn't need to. Everyone in town already knew. They saw the way Nathaniel walked beside her at the winter market, carrying Mira's handmade crafts like priceless treasures. The way Alara always saved him the last cranberry scone at the bakery, even when it sold out. The way he showed up at school plays and snowball fights with thermoses of cocoa and extra mittens tucked into his pockets. They never made an announcement. They didn't have to. 2 months ago, when the judge signed the final papers approving Nathaniel's adoption of Mira as her legal guardian, no one questioned it. Not even the town gossip, who could make drama out of snowfall. After all, Nathaniel had already been showing up for the little girl every day for months. He never tried to replace anyone. He simply became what she needed, and she, in turn, filled every silent corner he had once lived in. The living room, once pristine and cold, now overflowed with toys, music, and color. A stack of Christmas books waited on the couch. The small artificial tree that had stood bare the year before now glowed, laden with mismatched ornaments, some store-bought, most made by Mira's hands. One still held the pink bow she'd worn that very first night she knocked on his door. As dusk settled and snow began to fall again, Nathaniel opened the front door, letting in a breath of crisp air. "Where are you going?" Alara called from the kitchen, still drying the dishes. He turned, grinning. "Just checking." "For what?" she asked. He looked out at the quiet street, the lights twinkling in windows down the lane. "Just wanted to see what it feels like when the doors open," he said. He paused. Looking back at her and Mira, their faces glowing in the kitchen light, dusted with flour and joy. "Turns out," he added, "that feels a lot like home, that Christmas." The tree was nearly twice as tall as the year before. Its twinkling star brushed the ceiling, and every branch sagged beneath candy canes, glittered ornaments, and red and green felt hearts. Alara stood back, arms folded, watching the lights dance across the walls. Mira had gone overboard with the decorations, as always, and Nathaniel had let her. Also, as always, the three of them stood together in the golden light of the fire. The scent of pine mingling with cocoa and cinnamon. Snow fell softly outside, brushing against the tall windows and blurring the world in white. Mira leaned against Nathaniel's side, her small hand tucked in his. She wore her favorite pink holiday dress, the one with the satin ribbon at the back, and carried a tray of warm cookies with careful concentration. Alara stepped closer, slipping her hand into Nathaniel's free one. She looked up at him, her voice low but certain. "You saved us," she whispered. "Me and Mira. You gave us back something we thought we'd lost." Nathaniel shook his head gently. "No," he said, his voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "You two saved me." His eyes moved to Mira, who was humming a carol under her breath as she added one last cookie to the tray. "I didn't know what a family was supposed to feel like," he continued. "Not really? Not until I opened that door and found you both standing there." Alara's eyes shimmered. Nathaniel turned and knelt before Mira, meeting her eyes. She smiled, soft and sweet, powdered sugar dusting her cheek. "From now on," he told her, "every Christmas I'll be the one knocking on the door first. Just to remind you how much I love walking through it." Mira's face lit up. She leaned forward and kissed his cheek, then carefully lifted the tray again. "Time to knock," she declared proudly. Nathaniel opened the front door, and a crisp breath of winter swept through the room. The night outside glowed with silver light, church bells chiming faintly from downtown. The little girl stepped onto the porch, the tray steady in her hands. Then, with a giggle, she turned and knocked gently. Once, twice, 3 times. "On their own door," Alara laughed. Nathaniel smiled. The door was already open, but that didn't matter, because this time the knock wasn't about entering. It was about welcoming others in across the street A moving truck idled outside the small cottage on the corner. Its porch light flicked on as Mira called out, "Cookies for the new neighbors!" And from inside their own home, warmth followed her into the night. Ilara, Nathaniel, and Mira stood together under the porch light, the snow catching in their hair, soft as a blessing. The church bells rang again, 12 times, midnight, Christmas Day. Nathaniel looked down at the two people beside him, their laughter, their light, their love, and for the first time in many years, he felt a peace he had once believed was impossible. They stepped back inside, leaving the door open behind them. And for a moment, under the falling snow, it seemed as though the whole world paused to listen. 3 hearts beat in rhythm. A quiet promise took shape, a life, finally, beginning. The world outside their window had turned to glass and glitter by morning. The snowfall had deepened overnight, blanketing Pine Hollow Road in white silence. The town of Snowage stirred slowly awake, smoke rising from chimneys, distant laughter echoing from sledding hills. Inside Nathaniel's home, the home that once felt more like a museum than a dwelling, soft music played and the scent of cinnamon rolls drifted through the air. Mira was the first to wake. She padded barefoot into the living room, her curls tousled, dragging her stuffed bear by one arm. The tree lights twinkled faintly, reflecting in her sleepy eyes. For a moment she just stared, as if she was seeing it all for the first time. The ornaments, the stockings, the warmth that seemed to breathe through the house. Ilara entered quietly behind her, robe cinched, mug of coffee in hand. She smiled when she saw Mira curled up on the couch, gazing at the glowing tree. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked gently. Mira shook her head. "It's too pretty," she whispered. Ilara set down her cup and joined her on the couch. Together they watched the snow swirl beyond the window. The world outside looked softer, slower, as though time itself had taken a deep breath. When Nathaniel came downstairs, his hair still damp from a shower, he stopped in the doorway. The sight before him, the two people he loved most, wrapped in morning light, made something ache in his chest, a quiet gratitude that words could never reach. "Morning," he said softly. Mira turned, face lighting up. "Merry Christmas, Mr. N." He smiled, pretending to frown. "What's this Mr. N business? Didn't we make that official?" She giggled. Fine.
Merry Christmas."
"Dad." The word landed softly but powerfully like a snowflake finding its place. Nathaniel froze, then crossed the room, scooping her into his arms. He pressed his cheek against her hair. "Merry Christmas, Mira," he murmured. Ilara watched them, eyes misting. There had been years when she thought words like family and home no longer belonged to her. But here they were, living, breathing proof that even after loss, love could take root again. Later that day, the 3 of them walked through the town square, bundled in scarves and laughter. Snowage was alive with light and colour, carolers outside the bakery, children chasing each other across the drifts, and the smell of roasted chestnuts carrying on the breeze. Nathaniel carried Mira on his shoulders, her mittened hands gripping his hat.
"Faster," she cried. "You're heavy, you know that?"
He teased. "I'm not," she protested.
"You just need more hot chocolate power."
Ilara laughed, linking her arm through his. "She's not wrong. You do slow down after 2 cups, he gave her a mock glare. "Are you calling me old?" "Older," she replied.
"And wiser, hopefully." The bell tower struck noon, the sound rolling over the snow like a hymn.
For a moment they stopped and just listened. The whole town seemed to hum with warmth, people waving, greetings exchanged, simple kindness flowing like the light of the season itself. When they reached the bakery, the same place where they had first shared awkward small talk nearly 2 winters ago, Ilara insisted they stop inside. The air was thick with the smell of sugar and spice, and the windows fogged from the heat. The owner, Mrs. Donnelly, greeted them with a grin. "Well, if it isn't my favorite family," she said. "You three always bring sunshine with you." Mira leaned across the counter. "We brought cookies too," she said proudly, pulling out a small tin wrapped with a red bow. Mrs. Donnelly clutched her chest dramatically. "For me? Oh, you'll spoil me, sweetheart." Ilara smiled at Nathaniel over the little girl's head. "You know," she said softly, "the first time I came in here, I could barely afford a muffin." Nathaniel reached for her hand beneath the counter.
"And now?"
"Now I can't imagine not sharing everything I have." He squeezed her fingers gently, his eyes reflecting the golden light from the bakery's window.
"That's what love does," he said.
"It multiplies when you give it away." That evening, as twilight deepened into violet, the three of them walked home under a sky scattered with stars. The snow crunched softly under their boots. The cottage across the street glowed faintly. The new neighbors had strung up their first set of lights. Mira tugged on Nathaniel's sleeve.
Can we bring them cocoa tomorrow?" "Of course," he said.
"Cocoa and cookies,"
"That's how friendships begin, like us?"
she asked. "Exactly like us." They reached their house, the one that had once been Nathaniel's fortress. Now it was a haven, warm, imperfect, and alive. Inside, Ilara lit a few candles while Mira set up her tiny music box on the mantel. Its soft tune filled the room, delicate and wistful. Nathaniel stood by the window for a moment, watching the snow fall. It looked endless, like forgiveness descending quietly over the earth. Ilara came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. Everything they had fought for, the courage, the loss, the healing, was right there in the silence between them. Mira climbed into Nathaniel's lap, yawning.
"Tell me a story," she murmured. He kissed the top of her head.
"What kind of story?"
"About the man who waited for snow," Nathaniel smiled faintly. "Oh, that one's easy."
"It's about a man who thought winter was the end of everything, until one snowy night someone knocked on his door and proved it was really just the beginning." Mira's eyes fluttered, heavy with sleep. "Did he ever stop waiting?" "No," Nathaniel said softly, looking at Ilara. "He just started waiting for different things like laughter in the mornings and hugs at bedtime and the sound of tiny feet running across the floor." Ilara leaned her head against his shoulder.
"And snow?"
she whispered. He smiled. "Always snow." Outside, the wind rose gently, carrying with it the faint sound of church bells from town. The fire crackled, the lights glowed, and the little girl's breathing slowed as she drifted to sleep. Ilara reached over and brushed a tear from Nathaniel's cheek, the kind of tear born not from sorrow, but from the unbearable grace of finally being whole. They sat there, the three of them, wrapped in quiet peace as snow fell steady and sure outside their window. The house no longer waited for someone to arrive. It was full. It was alive, and somewhere beyond the falling snow, the world seemed to pause once more, to listen, to breathe, to remember that even in the coldest seasons, hope still knocks.